Hello, this is Greg Herman with Herman Law Firm. Today we're talking about if your teenager gets in an accident, what the legal process would be for your minor. And this is, I'm assuming your child gets injured. I'll talk in just a second about if your child causes the accident. But if your child gets injured, it's pretty much like a regular case. You still need to get him to the hospital, probably make sure there's no internal bleeding, stuff like that, get him to a doctor. You are responsible for his medical bills if he's a minor. Um, Now, that doesn't mean you can't recover him from the other driver, but you're responsible for his medical bills just like you would be for just a regular medical bills, and you're required to take him to the doctor and all that. Um, but when you come in and sign up, you will have to sign as the parent or guardian if you're not the actual parents. You can sign up as a guardian ad litem. You can even you can be if you're not legally appointed yet. You can just sign up as next friend, and then like let's say you're an aunt or something or a close friend of the family, and the parent's not available or can't, or parents not in the child's life, you can sign up as next friend on behalf of the kid. Um, and most of the time, the other deal with children and minors, not always, but most of the time, the insurance company, when they go to settle the case with you, is gonna want a to go through the court and is going to want what's called a friendly suit. And that's where you get the court appoints another lawyer, and that lawyer's sole job is to just look out for the interests of the minor. And they're called attorney ad litems, and they'll be paid by the defense by the insurance company. Uh, but it's going to have to meet that lawyer's approval, and he's going to have to say, yes, this settlement is in the best interest of the child. I think it's enough money for him. And then what happens is they put that money into the registry of the court until the minor turns 18, and they invest it in a savings account, which means hardly anything in interest these days because interest rates are so low. But when the kid turns 18, then he can get the money out. Um, but in the meantime, the parent again is responsible for all the medical bills. Not that we can't recover those from the insurance company or the adverse, um, but regardless, the parent's responsible for them and has got to pay them. Uh, and any money recovered, we get lots of clients that want to borrow money on their kid's case because their rent's due and they don't have rent, or they got a car payment and they don't have their car payment, or they need to get groceries. And most of the time, we have to say, well, if the ad litem approves it, then that's fine, and ultimately the judge has to approve it. But usually they frown on you borrowing money on your kid's case to pay your rent because you're supposed to be able to pay your rent, whether you have a child or not. Now, if you can show, hey, the reason I don't have rent money is I had to pay, all the kids' medical bills, then that could be a different story. But usually if you'll hire Herman and Herman, we can usually work with the hospitals and the ambulance providers and the doctors and stuff to hold off billing on your case until the case is settled, and then we can negotiate with them and get those bills lower. So anyway, that's just a few things to remember in a minor's case. Um, the next thing is, what if your child, the minor, is responsible for the accident? Are you responsible? Well, it depends. If you let your minor take the car and your minor's not an experienced driver, and a jury finds that was negligence, then yeah, you're responsible. Or if your teen driver is a horrible driver and you still let him drive, uh, then a jury's probably going to say, "Hey, you're negligent. You shouldn't have let your teenager drive. He speeds all the time. He's got 10 speeding tickets, and he's been in two other accidents. Why'd you give this kid the car keys again?" Uh, so it all comes down to negligence, which is just the failure to meet ordinary care. Failure to act the way an ordinary, prudent person would act under the same or similar circumstances. if the ordinary prudent person would not give their keys to a teenager who goes out and speeds all the time and gets in accidents, then they're probably going to say, hey, you shouldn't have given your teenage driver those car keys. So they're probably going to find you negligent. Again, that's why you need good liability insurance. Don't have your teen excluded from your policy. You have to pay extra or get him his own policy. Sometimes it's cheaper to get him his own policy. And we covered that in another video. But you are going to need liability for the teen and for property damage and everything too, because if your kid goes out and wrecks your car and he's excluded and you said, no, don't put him on my policy, I don't want to pay because it costs too much to put him on there. Well, guess what? If he goes out and wrecks your car, who's going to pay the property damage? Your insurance company's not going to pay it because they specifically excluded him. And they're not going to pay for anybody else he runs into because guess what? You excluded him from your policy. So you either got to make sure he's on your policy or get him his own policy, and make him get a job or something and work for it, and pay you for it so he can learn the value of money. But that's a whole different subject. Anyway, so just to wrap up. You may or may not need an ad litem if your child gets injured. You're still responsible for the medical bills, and yes, you can be responsible if your kid runs into somebody else and causes injuries. So make sure you got full coverage for that.